I'm here today with Suzanne Kelsey, the author of a new book titled Skipping Church, Notes from an Accidental Minister's Wife. A recent transplant from the Midwest to Northern California, Suzanne is a writer, artist, university instructor, and a lover of family, friends, nature, contemplation, and creative pursuits. Here's an endorsement of Suzanne's new book from another of our author friends, Lori Erickson. In Skipping Church, Suzanne Kelsey eloquently and honestly describes the challenges of being a minister's spouse and the struggles and rewards of her own search for truth. Her exploration of the complex terrain of a long and loving marriage provides a model for anyone who loves someone with different life goals. Even more, her keen insights, willingness to ask hard questions, and openness to the mysteries and wonders of the world show us that spirituality can be found in many forms. So Suzanne, thank you for writing this wonderful book, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to Lori for that great endorsement.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that Lori introduced us, and that she at least helped from an endorsement perspective with your book.
She's awesome in that way. She's such a connector of people. I really love her for that.
She is, and an incredible author and
yes,
travel guide in her own right.
Yes, yeah.
So before we get into the book, though, kind of tell us a little bit more, if we could, about your background.
Sure. Yes, I'm an Iowan born and bred and lived in Iowa until just a few years ago. So well into my 60s. And I was raised in a small town in north central Iowa called Iowa Falls. Eventually attended all three of the state universities for various iterations of different degrees. Wound up teaching English at a community college in Cedar Rapids, Iowa for some years. And then sort of realized that, actually to use the word calling, that teaching wasn't really my calling as much as writing was. So I shifted from teaching writing to becoming a writer, initially a freelance writer, commercial writer. So over the years, I've done a lot of marketing writing for colleges, mostly in the Midwest and some toward the East in the U.S. And but I continued to teach online for the University of Iowa, a few courses a year. So my husband and I were high school sweethearts. We married young at 20, and we have two sons, and they live out in the California East Bay, and so that's actually why we're out here.
I was going to ask you how you made the transition from Iowa to California.
Right. Yeah, it was something I write about in my book. It was one of those miracles we were talking about earlier. It happened that there was an opening for a church in San Francisco, and my husband applied unbeknownst to me. And his rationale was that it would put us close to both of our sons and their wives and our three grandsons. And
that's a big deal.
Yeah. So
having four grandchildren myself, I realize how important that is.
I hope you're close to them.
Relatively, yes.
Great. Yeah. It's a real delightful way to live, to be close to these grandkids. One of them is just 11 months old. So to our surprise, he actually was offered this job. And so that's why we're out here at least for a few years until we retire.
Well, good for you. So what caused you to write this book, right? I mean, this is like after, 30 some years of marriage, right? And,
right.
You went through a lot, obviously, between the time you were young and got engaged and now, but what drove you to actually put it into a book?
Well, Chuck and I are actually in January we'll have been married 46 years.
Wow.
And like I said, we got married when we were 20. And Chuck his family was very heavily Methodist. His ancestors had actually helped start the Methodist Church in Iowa Falls. And Chuck came up through the youth group and got quite involved on the state level with the Methodists. And he always tried to get me to tag along to the youth group meetings, but it never took with me. I was raised congregational, First Congregational Church in Iowa Falls, which is now merged with the UCC, I believe. And but I just didn't, have a heart for what I was experiencing at the church. And when Chuck decided to become a minister, we'd been married 14 years, and though he'd been heavily involved in the church in high school, and he at once had talked about being a minister, I had told him while we were dating never to count on marrying me if he was going to be a minister. And it wasn't a threat; it was just a reality. I would not make a good minister's wife, was my feeling, since I didn't subscribe to the theology of the church. So it was a surprise to me when, after 14 years of our marriage and 2 kids, he announced that he had decided he was going to become a Methodist minister, and he was quite firm about it. And I pled and cried and, reacted. And, but he was quite firm about it in a gentle, loving way. And of course, I, came to and realized I couldn't interfere with what he felt was a calling. And so I proceeded to find a good therapist that I worked with for about a year. And I also started writing these essays as catharsis for what was going on. So the first chapter, which is called The Proclamation, recounts he and I in our living room discussing this surprise and sort of what ensued for me, which was that, as I expected, everybody started treating us differently once they knew that we were to be a clergy couple. In those days, anyway, he was able to quickly get licensed to preach. He started working for a church before he even attended seminary. And then he attended seminary over at least 7 years, if not longer, period of time in the summers. But kept, working for the church. So it was all very quick, and it was shocking to me, and I was upset and puzzled about how to continue. And so that's why I started writing the book. It really was just to try to put things down and make sense out of them, maybe find some humor in it if I could. So that's what got it started.
So kind of almost self-therapy, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I wrote a lot in my journals too, but I'd been introduced to the genre of personal essay writing when I was in college by a wonderful professor named David Hamilton at the University of Iowa. And I really fell in love with that genre. And so it became very natural for me to take what I was musing about in my journal entries and use those musings as seeds for essays. So that's, I think the sun is shining on my face. So yeah, that's how it all got started.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I work with a lot of authors, obviously, and everybody has got a different story of how they got their book deal, right? So in your case, how did that happen?
In the first 10 years, I wrote what I thought was a complete manuscript and sent it off to, various publishers. I remember sending it off, and I'm so glad it wasn't published at the time, but I remember sending it off to, I didn't know where to send it to because I'm not religious, but my husband is. So I tried secular publishers and I tried Christian publishers, not sort of naively not realizing that Christian publishers vary in their theologies. And I remember one editor upbraided me for the book. It was too irreverent. I should be writing a book like how to be partner in ministry even when your spouse is a clergy person or something like that. So I kind of shoved everything in a drawer, and then maybe brought it out every few years, try to noodle a few more chapters along, and then I would send it somewhere, and to know, with no results. But then finally, a year ago last summer, I was able to put the final chapter in. It's called California Dreaming. And I realized, it's done now. This is the best that I can do. And I'm actually done with this whole subject. My life has morphed into other interests too. So this time I really carefully researched publishers and read a lot of websites, a lot of memoir-oriented websites of people that were recommending various publishers for memoirs. And I came across someone's recommendation for Shanti Arts Publishing, a little press in Maine. And their focus is on 3 themes: art, nature, and spirit. And when I saw that, I thought, boy, if there was ever a publisher for this book, it's Shanti Arts. And if they don't take it, maybe I'll just, let it sit. And within a few months, Christine Coates, the owner and editor, contacted me and said that she'd like to take the book. I was very pleased. And I've been very pleased with her handling of the material and the design and the, the help that she's given me for initial marketing efforts has been great too. So can't say enough good things about this little press out in Maine.
That's really good. There's not a company I'd been familiar with.
Uh-huh.
And as you mentioned, a lot of publishers are not looking for memoir these days. I mean, that's just not a genre that is terribly popular from an acquisitions perspective. It tends to be now dominated by celebrity memoir, and that's about
it. Right.
So it's good that you found a home, for this. I mean, it does have a theme though, too, besides obviously being a story of your life. And I think that helps, the theme aspect of that. This is just not, all about Suzanne Kelsey, right?
It's
all about, an accidental minister's wife, as your, subtitle indicates.
Yeah. And that's my hope, is that the themes are universal. And that's the early response that I'm getting from people who have read the book. They're recognizing these themes that that aren't meant to give advice, but meant to provoke people into thinking about their own, life themes that sort of boil up out of the mess of life. So themes of, living authentically apply to people in a lot of different situations, or the theme of, how to be supportive of a partner who chooses a path that affects your own quite drastically, how to proceed with that when you truly love that person. Those are questions that I think people ask a lot, regardless of whether their spouses or partners are in ministry or not. Spouses of public figures surely go through some of the things that I've gone through as a sort of a quasi-public figure of a minister's wife. And certainly the theme of where's home when you move frequently applies to a lot of people. I've been a kind of a trailing spouse because of Chuck's job. So many other people are in that situation, or maybe their own work has taken them to places that they didn't always want to go. So how do you assimilate, and how do you, make friends with the idea that you've got a whole new group of people to try to get to know? And those are all questions that a lot of people have, I think. So yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
I certainly hope it's more than memoir. In fact, I think of it sort of secondarily as memoir, but primarily as a series of collected essays that are linked, that tell my story while asking the reader to think about their story.
So, a lot of this took place over a period of decades, like you said at the beginning of the book, you talk about before you guys got married, which was, as you mentioned, 46 years ago. So It sounded like you had a journal. Is that how you kind of were able to keep track of some of this and recreate your thoughts in the moment?
Yeah, ever since really about the time that Chuck decided to be a minister, about 1990, his decision coincided with my acquiring a full-time position at community college in Cedar Rapids. And so we were both suddenly very, very busy. And I found that keeping a journal sort of helped me to keep my head on as a busy, community college teacher of writing with a lot of papers to read and grade. And I guess it was, my own desire to be a writer was the way I could, nurture that desire was through almost daily journal writing. So yeah, over the years, I've kept a journal almost daily. In fact, during the pandemic, the first year of the pandemic, I took about a year to really cull through those journals. And I had like 150 journals, and I culled them down to about 40. Because a lot of it was, repetitive, and, especially in the early years of my teaching and Chuck's ministry, there was a lot of complaining that was cathartic at the time, but no ancestors need to read that stuff. So I've kind of changed the way I keep a journal now. But at any rate, yeah, the journals were the seeds for each of the chapters. Yeah.
So I know a lot of folks that have written books, particularly that are kind of like, self-inspection and memoir, things like that. They come away from that experience having learned something, learn about themselves, or, maybe reflecting on what they might have wanted to do differently or whatever. What kind of learnings have you, found out of this experience?
Well, I think everybody might come to this if they did this. I guess I just found that I've led a very wonderful life, and it didn't always feel that way. With the struggles of, a lot of my struggles were inner struggles, torn between feeling obligated to be a public helpmate for Chuck with his churches, between that and being true to who I was, which is much more inward and contemplative and oriented toward hikes and walks in the woods and writing and art. So the two seem to clash with each other. And I in the early years, I felt guilty a lot of the time that, I wasn't being or doing who I needed to be. And so, but I learned through the writing, as I was able to kind of see the threads and how we did grow and how I did grow, I learned that, it's been a pretty wonderful life. I'm really lucky. And I think that I take that learning forward now on a daily basis. Like, the struggles are over, and each day is a gift.
I think many of us that have reached this stage in our lives, feel similarly that, we've been incredibly blessed as you look back on everything. So I know I feel that way too.
Yeah, I always hate to use the word blessed because, that, you look at some people's lives and it doesn't seem like they're blessed. I mean, over the years, we've seen a lot of people in a lot of very deep struggles. And, can they say overall that their lives are blessed? I don't know. I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky.
So you've got the unique distinction that you did the artwork for the cover of the book. That is pretty rare in terms of, most of the authors that I work with. Can you talk about that and how that happened?
Yeah. Since I've had an interest in art for about the last 10 years or so, and it's a growing interest and becoming a real passion and kind of fighting these days with the writing, actually. And I've had some great teachers out here, including a woman named Emily Whale, who is from Alameda, where we live, and she uses pen and ink in watercolor in very unique ways. And so I started producing some paintings that I really liked. And to me, this one that's on the cover kind of represented so much that's in the book. I mean, the spiderwort is a native prairie plant, Iowa and other tall grass prairies. The bee, I like to think of as me, sort of freely flying. There were other options for the covers that included, photographs of churches and things like that. And I had to really consult with a few close friends to ask them if they thought I was crazy to lobby for my own artwork on the cover. But Christine accepted the idea, and then she gave a great design around it. I don't know if you're able to tell, but in the background is kind of an echo of stained glass.
Okay. I didn't notice
closely, and I really like the way she did that. So yeah, to me, it's sort of flying free from the constraints that I feel if I'm asked to be religious. But at the same time, of course, I hope that others realize that I'm not putting down religion, but for me, my spirituality is very nature-based, and I wanted to reflect that on the cover. So So I actually have a little blog that I run called thesallyproject.blogspot.com. And I post, I'm a developing artist. And so I post what I'm learning and some of my art on that blog periodically. And that's actually my idea for my next book is to write more about the creative life and how to nurture your creative impulses even in your older years. So
Cool. Well, I was going to ask you if you had any plans for future books.
yeah, that's the next one. I've been noodling. Once again, it'll have some essays that it'll be formed around, but I hope to include some of my artwork in it too. So.
Well, the one that's on the cover of this book is absolutely beautiful. So
Thank you.
Glad that you were able to get that on there.
Thank you.
It's striking from a color perspective and kind of from
Thank you.
I don't know, design or composition. I'm not an artist, so I don't know the right words to describe it, but it is striking, and beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm glad that it worked out.
Thank you. I am too. I wasn't sure. Like I said, I was a little unsure. It seemed a little vain to put my own artwork on the cover, but in the end, I felt that it spoke the best.
One thing that's nice about it is that the color of the subtitle matches the color of, some of the flower.
That is, yeah, Christine, the designer, did that. And I like that. I like that too.
I do too. I think that's a really nice touch.
Yeah.
So if there was like one thing that you'd want people to take away from your book, what would you say that it would be?
I guess it would be, it seems trite and cliche to lead your best, most authentic life. It seems just so easy, doesn't it? But just yesterday, I was wrapping up my semester for the students that I teach at the University of Iowa. And their final, this course that I teach is called Interpersonal Effectiveness, and it's a out of the counseling rehab department within the College of Education at the university. And it's basically a human relations course that people can take. But we do a lot of work in that course about sort of being centered in who you are. I mean, is really the best way to become more interpersonally effective. And this student was writing about sort of just waking up to who he was, and who he is happens to be someone that maybe his family hasn't reinforced, or his community around him. And, the essay was just so poignant, and it just reminded me of how tough it is for people to figure out who they are and then to live who they are. So I guess that's the best takeaway for me, is to live who you are.
Good. So if people want to find the book, I know Shanty Arts has a website. Is it shantyarts.com?
Yes. Also, it's available on Amazon. So, if you're an Amazon Prime member, then you can get free shipping with it. If they can go to my website, is SuzanneKelsey.com, and find access to it as well. So
okay, good.
Mm-hmm. Or ask for it at any local bookstore if they want to support their local bookstore. It's hooked into Ingram, so they can quickly get copies that way. So.
Good. Well, Suzanne, congratulations on
Thank you.
A lifelong endeavor, so to speak.
Yeah.
A lot of work, a lot of years of work culminating in a beautiful book. So
thank you.
I'm sure it will help other people, and congratulations on making it happen.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time today. This was fun.
Sure. Again, the title of the book is Skipping Church, Notes from an Accidental Minister's Wife. And you can find it at shantyarts.com or SuzanneKelsey.com or wherever books are sold. So, Suzanne,
very good.
Thank you again and best wishes.
Thank you too.